The radio crackled, a harsh, static-filled whisper in the oppressive silence of the ruins. A hand, clad in rough tactical gloves, tightened around the handset. The voice that emerged from the speaker was sharp, laced with the unmistakable authority of command. "Rostova, this is Command Actual. Abort the ingress. I repeat, abort. The area is too hot. Return to the rally point. That is a direct order." Captain Eva Rostova did not immediately reply. Her world was a landscape of monochrome green, viewed through the advanced lenses of her night vision goggles. The skeletal remains of a city stretched out before her, a ghostly panorama under a moonless, starless sky. The Dark Zone. They had branded it with that ominous name on the maps back at headquarters, a place deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable for a sanctioned rescue. The official satellite intel claimed the thermal signatures were just decoy generators, the prisoner reports unverified whispers. But Ava knew. She knew in the pit of her stomach, a cold, hard certainty forged from years of analyzing patterns and lies. She lifted the radio to her lips, her voice a low, steady murmur that barely disturbed the night. "Negative, Command. The intel is flawed. I have positive visual on the entry point." It was a lie, but a necessary one. She was still 500 meters from the old textile mill, her objective. But turning back now was not an option. Not after what she had seen. Not after the promise she had made. "Captain, you are in violation of a direct combat order," the voice snapped back, the frustration clear even through the digital compression. "You have zero air support, zero extract possibility. You go in there, you are on your own. Is that clear? You will be completely alone." Eva's gaze remained fixed ahead, scanning the crumbling street through her rifle's scope. "Understood, Command. Proceeding with the mission." She released the talk button, cutting off the inevitable response. The silence that rushed back in was heavier than before, filled with the weight of her decision. She had just torched her career. If she survived this, a court-martial was the best she could hope for. But career was a distant, abstract concept here in the cold dark. It could not compete with the memory of a face, Anya's face. It had been 3 days ago in a dusty makeshift safe house on the secure side of the border. The old woman's eyes, deep set and shadowed by a grief that was years old, had held hers with a terrifying intensity. She had pressed a small, worn photograph into Eva's hand. It showed a young man, barely out of his teens, grinning in a crisp army uniform. "His name is Leo," Anya had whispered, her voice rough. "They say he is gone, but a mother knows. A mother knows her child's heart still beats." Eva had tried to explain the protocols, the chain of command, the unverified nature of the intelligence. But the words had felt hollow, ash in her mouth. She had seen that look before, a lifetime ago, in her own mother's eyes when the 2 men in dress uniforms had appeared on their doorstep. That was a door no one ever came back through. Anya's son deserved a different ending. A soft chime in her earpiece, a proximity alert from the motion sensor she had placed 50 meters back. Her body went rigid, melting instantly into the shadow of a collapsed wall. She held her breath, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard of her suppressed rifle. The sound of booted feet, casual, unconcerned, echoed down the street. A 2-man patrol, their rifles slung over their shoulders, chatting in low tones. They passed within 10 meters of her position, completely unaware of the ghost watching them from the darkness. She waited until their footsteps faded completely, until the only sound was the frantic beating of her own heart. This was it, the point of no return. She took a final, steadying breath, the cool air filling her lungs. They had told her to stay out of the dark zone. They had given her a direct order. But some orders were meant to be broken. Some debts could not be ignored. Captain Eva Rostova moved forward, a solitary figure swallowed by the immense, waiting darkness. The memory of the briefing room was as sharp and cold as the rubble beneath her boots. It had been a sterile, windowless box, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and tension. A large digital map glowed on the main screen, the dark zone blotched in angry red. Colonel Jack stood before it, his face a mask of grim finality. "Thermal signatures are inconsistent," he had stated, his pointer tapping the red zone. "Our assessment confirms decoy generators. The local source for the prisoner claim is unreliable, likely compromised. The risk-to-reward ratio does not support a direct action mission. It's a ghost hunt, people." Eva had remained seated, her back straight, her hands folded on the cold metal table. "With all due respect, sir, the pattern is wrong for decoys." Her voice was calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. "The heat signatures are too stable. Decoys flare and fade. These read like human habitation, life support systems, and my source has a 100% reliability record." Jax's eyes had narrowed, shifting from the map to pin her in place. "Your source, Captain, is a grieving mother. That is not an asset. That is a liability. Our satellites see everything." "That's just it, sir," Eva countered, her gaze unwavering. "The satellites see what they're programmed to see. They see the obvious heat bloom from the decoys we expect to find. They're not looking in the right place. The old textile mill has a subterranean level not on our maps. That's where they are." A murmur rippled through the other officers in the room. Jax's jaw tightened. "The mill is in the heart of the most heavily patrolled sector. Sending a team in there with no aerial reconnaissance, no quick reaction force, is a suicide mission. I will not sanction it. The mission is scrubbed. That is my final word." The finality in his tone should have ended it. For every other officer in the room, it did. They began gathering their notes, the meeting effectively over. But Eva remained seated. She saw Anya's face, the desperate hope warring with a lifetime of disappointment. She saw the photograph of the young man, Leo, his smile frozen in time. She saw her own mother, answering that fateful door. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping but gaining a new steely quality, "I am formally requesting permission for a solo reconnaissance patrol to verify the mill." Jax had stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "Denied, Captain. There will be no boots on the ground in that sector. Is that clear? Your personal feelings on this matter are noted, but they do not override operational security. Stand down." He had turned his back on her, a deliberate dismissal. The other officers filed out, avoiding her eyes. She was left alone in the briefing room, the ghost of the red zone still glowing on the screen. The order was legal. It was logical. It was, by every metric of modern warfare, the correct call. But war was not fought only with satellites and logic. It was fought in the hearts of soldiers and the pleas of mothers. It was fought in the spaces between orders and honor. Sitting there, in that silent room, Eva Rostova made her choice. She would follow her orders right up to the line. And then, for the sake of one life, for the sake of a debt she felt to her very core, she would cross it. She stood, her chair scraping loudly in the quiet room, and walked out, not to her barracks, but to the armory. She had a promise to keep. The safe house smelled of dried herbs and damp earth. It was a small stone-built structure on the very edge of the secure zone, its windows boarded up, a single oil lamp casting long, dancing shadows. Eva had come in civilian clothes, a plain jacket and trousers, feeling strangely vulnerable without the weight of her body armor and rifle. Anya was already there, waiting. The old woman's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, but they trembled slightly. The photo of her son, Leo, sat on the rough wooden table between them. "He has his father's smile," Anya said, her voice a soft, rasping whisper. She did not look at the picture, but directly at Eva. "His father was a soldier, too. He did not come home from the First War." She gestured vaguely towards the mountains, towards the dark zone. "They give you a flag, they say words. The words do not fill the emptiness at the table. The flag does not keep you warm at night." Eva felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had heard versions of this story her whole life, from her own mother, from the families of fallen comrades. It was the eternal, brutal cost of service, a price paid by those who never fired a weapon. "The intelligence is not confirmed, Anya," Eva said, forcing herself to maintain a professional distance that was rapidly crumbling. "My commanders, they are cautious. They need proof. What proof does a mother's heart need?" Anya asked, her dark eyes glistening in the lamplight. "I feel him. Here." She pressed a hand to her chest. "He is alive. He is cold. He is afraid." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an intense, desperate whisper. "They are all in the old mill. The one by the river. The soldiers do not use the top floors. They are broken. They use the places under the ground, the cold rooms where they used to keep the cloth." Ava's breath caught. Subterranean storage. That wasn't on any of their maps or satellite schematics. It was the kind of hyper-local, intimate knowledge that no drone could ever capture. It was the missing piece. "Anya, if someone were to go in there," Ava began, choosing her words with extreme care. The old woman reached across the table and grasped Ava's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her skin rough and calloused from a life of hard work. "You are the only one who has listened. The others, they look at me with pity. They see a crazy old woman. But you see a soldier?" Her eyes searched Ava's face. "You have lost someone too. I see it in you. The same emptiness." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Ava looked down at their joined hands, at the photograph of the smiling young man. She saw her brother's face, forever young in his own graduation photo. She saw the two uniformed men at the door, the way her mother's knees had buckled, the sound that had torn from her throat, a sound of pure animal devastation. Anya was right. She knew that emptiness. She had lived with it her entire adult life. "I cannot make you a promise," Eva whispered, her throat tight. "There are orders." Anya nodded slowly, a profound understanding in her gaze. She was not asking for promises from a soldier. She was asking for hope from a human being. She released Eva's hand and gently pushed the photograph across the table. "Take it," she said. "So you will remember his face. So you will know who you are bringing home." Ava picked up the photograph. The paper felt fragile, precious. Leo's grin was infectious, full of a future he believed was guaranteed. She tucked it carefully into an inner pocket of her jacket, right over her heart. It was not an official deployment order. It was not a tactical brief. But in that moment, it became the most important piece of mission equipment she would carry. She stood up, the legs of her chair scraping against the stone floor. She looked at Anya, and she gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't a salute. It was something deeper, a covenant between two women who understood the true price of war. She walked out of the safe house, the weight of the photograph a constant burning reminder against her chest. The official mission was scrubbed, but her personal mission had just begun. The silence of the dark zone was a living entity. It was not a true silence, but a void filled with 1,000 tiny, menacing sounds. The skittering of rubble disturbed by some unseen creature, the faint moan of the wind through shattered window frames, the creak of a twisted steel beam settling deeper into its grave. Through her night vision goggles, the world was rendered in 100 shades of luminous green, a ghostly negative of reality. Captain Ava Rostova moved through this landscape like a phantom, her every sense screaming. Her suppressed rifle was an extension of her arms, its weight a familiar comfort. She moved from shadow to shadow, her steps deliberate and silent. The training was automatic. Scan, move, stop, listen, scan again. The abandoned textile mill was still 3 blocks away, a hulking silhouette against the slightly lighter green of the night sky. The route she had memorized from the satellite images was almost useless on the ground. A street that looked clear from space was now choked with the carcass of a burned-out truck. A building that seemed intact was a hollow shell, its interior open to the elements. She dropped to one knee, pressing her back against a cold, damp wall. She closed her eyes for a second, shutting out the green haze, and listened with pure instinct. There it was, the sound she had been dreading. The crunch of a boot on gravel, rhythmical, unhurried. A patrol. She calculated their vector. They were moving perpendicular to her path, about 30 meters to her east. If they held their course, they would pass by without noticing her. She became a statue, her breathing so shallow it was almost non-existent. She could hear their voices now, low and conversational in a language she understood. They were complaining about the cold, about the boredom of the night watch. One of them laughed. The sound was obscenely normal in this place of death. They passed. The sounds of their footsteps and voices faded into the oppressive background hum. Eva waited a full 2 minutes after the last echo died before she moved again. She pushed off the wall, her muscles protesting the prolonged stillness. She had to cross a wide, open intersection. It was the most dangerous part of the journey so far. There was no cover, just a vast expanse of cracked asphalt glittering with broken glass under her night vision. She took a deep breath, held it, and then moved. It was not a run, but a low, fluid sprint, her body coiled, minimizing her profile. Every instinct screamed that she was exposed, that a dozen unseen eyes were tracking her from the dark windows. She reached the other side and melted into a doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was safe. For now. The next obstacle was a collapsed bridge over a narrow canal. The water below was black and stagnant. The only way across was a single rusted I-beam that spanned the gap. It was a test of balance and nerve. One misstep, one slip, and the noise would bring the entire garrison down on her. She slung her rifle across her back and began to inch across, her arms outstretched for balance. The metal was slick with dew. Her boots, designed for traction on rough terrain, felt clumsy on the narrow surface. Below, the dark water seemed to beckon. She focused on the other side, on the solid ground just a few meters away. She did not look down. She did not think about the drop. She thought of the photograph in her pocket. She thought of Leo's smile. Step by agonizing step, she crossed the abyss. As her feet touched the far side, a wave of relief washed over her, so potent it made her knees feel weak. She allowed herself 5 seconds to recover, leaning against a wall and pulling her rifle back into her hands. She was closer now. The mill loomed larger, its broken windows like blind eyes staring down at her. The debt was not yet paid, the promise not yet kept, but she was inside the beast's lair, and it had not yet sensed her. The mill's perimeter wall was a jagged scar of broken brick and twisted rebar. Eva lay prone on a carpet of weeds and debris, her body pressed flat against the cold earth. Through the powerful scope of her rifle, she scanned the entrance. 2 sentries. They were young, their postures slack with the boredom of a long, uneventful night. One leaned against the rusted iron gate, smoking a cigarette, the glowing tip a tiny, blinding sun in her night vision. The other paced a short, lazy path, his rifle slung carelessly over his shoulder. They were talking, their voices a low, indistinct murmur carried on the night air. This was the moment of truth. The point of no return she had mentally rehearsed 100 times. She could still turn back. She could melt back into the ruins, return to the rally point, and face the court-martial. She would be alive. Her career would be over, but she would be alive. The thought was a seductive whisper in her mind. Then her hand went to her chest, to the inner pocket of her tactical vest. She didn't need to take the photograph out. She could see Leo's face as clearly as if it were projected on the wall before her. She could see Anya's eyes, filled with a desperate, unwavering faith. A faith in her. Turning back was no longer an option. It hadn't been an option since she walked out of that safe house. She had to get past these men. The gate was the only viable entry point she had identified. The walls were too high, too unstable to scale quietly. She had to go through, and going through meant creating a path. It meant crossing a line that once crossed could never be uncrossed. This would not be a firefight. This would be an execution. A necessary, tactical, and soul-wrenching execution. She adjusted her position slightly, settling the rifle stock more firmly against her shoulder. The world narrowed to the green circle of her scope, the crosshairs settling on the chest of the smoking sentry. Her breathing stilled. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. The man laughed at something his companion said, the sound echoing faintly in the stillness. It was a human sound, a reminder of the life she was about to extinguish. She pushed the thought away. He was not a man. He was an obstacle, a threat to the completion of her mission, a barrier between her and the prisoners she had come to save. She exhaled slowly, a soft, controlled breath. On the tail end of the exhale, when her body was at its most still, she applied steady, increasing pressure to the trigger. But the sound was barely louder than a sigh. A sharp, precise cough that was swallowed by the night. The smoking sentry jolted as if touched by a live wire. The cigarette dropped from his fingers, a tiny ember tracing a brief arc to the ground. He crumpled without a sound, sliding down the gate into a dark, unmoving heap. The pacing sentry stopped. "Ivan," he called out, his voice laced with confusion. He took a step towards his fallen comrade. "Ivan, are you asleep? Get up!" He nudged the body with his boot. When there was no response, a note of panic entered his voice. "Ivan!" Era shifted the crosshairs. Her heart was a cold, hard stone in her chest. There was no room for emotion now. Only procedure. Only the grim, mechanical arithmetic of survival. Phut. The second sentry gasped, a short, wet sound. He stumbled back, one hand clutching at his chest, the other fumbling for the rifle on his shoulder. He never reached it. He collapsed onto his side, his legs kicking once, twice, before falling still. Silence rushed back in, deeper and heavier than before. The only movement was the thin, ghostly plume of smoke still rising from the fallen cigarette. Ava remained motionless for a full minute, scanning the surrounding windows, the dark corners of the yard, listening for any sign of alarm. There was nothing. The night had swallowed her actions whole. She rose from her position, her muscles stiff and cold. She moved forward, stepping over the two bodies without looking down. She did not allow herself to see their faces. They were obstacles. They were gone. The gate was open. The path to the mill and to the prisoners within was clear. The cost of the mission was no longer an abstract concept. It was a debt written in blood, and she had just added the first terrible payment. The inside of the mill was a cathedral of decay. The air was thick with the smell of old oil, damp concrete, and something else, something faintly organic and sour. Moonlight, filtered to a weak green glow through her goggles, streamed through holes in the vast roof, illuminating swirling motes of dust. Giant, silent looms stood like skeletal beasts, their belts hanging limp, frozen in the midst of some forgotten task. Ava moved with painstaking slowness, her boots making no sound on the gritty floor. Anya's words echoed in her mind. The places under the ground. The cold rooms where they used to keep the cloth. She found it tucked behind a massive rusted boiler, a heavy iron-ringed hatch set into the concrete floor. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of absolute darkness promising a descent into the earth. A cold draft whispered from the opening, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of unwashed bodies and despair. This was it. Her pulse hammered in her throat, a frantic drumbeat of hope and dread. She listened at the opening. Silence. Not the empty silence of the ruins above, but a thick, waiting silence, heavy with breath held too long. She slung her rifle and drew her sidearm, a more practical weapon for the close confines she expected. With a grunt of effort, she pulled the hatch fully open, the iron screeching a soft protest that made her wince. The sound seemed to scream in the profound quiet. She waited, poised for a shout, for the sound of a bolt being drawn. Nothing. Only that same, watchful silence. A set of steep concrete steps led down into the blackness. She descended one careful step at a time, her back to the wall. The green world of her night vision was useless here. The darkness was too complete. She switched to her rifle's infrared laser, a tiny, invisible beam that only she could see through her goggles. The narrow staircase opened into a low-ceilinged space. The air was frigid and damp, clinging to her skin, and then she saw them, huddled together in the far corner of the cellar, lying on filthy straw pallets, were shapes. Human shapes. They were emaciated, their uniforms hanging off them in rags. As the faint light from the open hatch spilled down the stairs, one of the shapes stirred. A head lifted, eyes wide and white with fear, reflected the dim light. A young man, his face gaunt and smudged with dirt, stared directly at her. He saw the silhouette of a soldier, the outline of a rifle. He flinched, pulling back and shielding the person next to him, a protective instinct that had somehow survived this hell. Ira quickly flipped up her night vision goggles. She didn't want to be a green-eyed monster emerging from the dark. She pulled a small red lens flashlight from her vest and clicked it on. The soft crimson glow illuminated the space without destroying their night vision or creating harsh shadows. She held her hands up, open and empty. "Leo," she whispered, the name feeling sacred in this place. "I'm looking for Leo Petrov." The young man who had flinched stared at her, his expression shifting from terror to stunned disbelief. He slowly lowered his arm, revealing the soldier next to him, a younger boy, curled in a feverish sleep, his breathing shallow and ragged. How do you know that name?" he croaked, his voice raw from disuse. Eva reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph. She held it out in the beam of the red light. "Your mother sent me. The effect was instantaneous." The young man, Leo, let out a choked sob. He stumbled forward, his legs weak, and collapsed to his knees before her. He didn't reach for the photo. He just stared at it, tears cutting clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. The other prisoners began to stir now, rising slowly, their movements sluggish with weakness and shock. They were 7 in total, 7 ghosts she had been sent to find. "She knew," Leo whispered, his voice trembling with a profound, soul-deep relief. "She knew I was alive." He looked up at Eva, his eyes filled with a light that had no business existing in such a place. "They said no one was coming for us. They said we were forgotten." Eva holstered her pistol and knelt, placing a firm, steadying hand on his bony shoulder. The professional mask she had worn for so long finally shattered. In its place was a fierce, protective certainty. "I'm not no one," she said, her voice low and clear, carrying to every corner of the cellar. "And you are not forgotten. Can you all walk? We're leaving now." The escape from the cellar was a slow, agonizing procession. The prisoners moved like sleepwalkers, their bodies weakened by malnutrition and confinement. Eva supported Leo, who was the most coherent, while the others clung to each other, a chain of desperate humanity shuffling up the concrete steps and into the vast, eerie space of the mill. The cold night air that greeted them seemed to sting, a shocking reminder of a world outside their prison. Eva quickly guided them into the deep shadows cast by the giant, silent looms. The immediate danger was over, but the most perilous part of the journey was just beginning. They had to cross the open ground of the mill yard, get through the gate, and then navigate 3 blocks of ruined city to the prearranged emergency extraction point. It was a distance that had taken her 20 minutes alone. With the prisoners, it could take an hour in the heart of enemy territory. She had just finished whispering the plan to Leo, instructing him to keep the others quiet and close, when the world exploded in light. The roar of a diesel engine shattered the silence. A military transport truck, its headlights blazing like 2 malevolent suns, screeched to a halt directly in front of the main gate, blocking their only exit. The timing was catastrophic. It was a routine patrol change, a twist of fate she could never have anticipated. The truck's doors flew open. Armed soldiers began to dismount, their figures stark black silhouettes against the blinding lights. They were chatting, laughing, completely unaware of the 7 ghosts and their guardian hiding just meters away. But it was only a matter of seconds. One of them would see the bodies of the sentries. One of them would glance into the shadows. There was no time for thought, only for action. Eva shoved Leo back towards the others, deeper into the cover of the machinery. "Stay down! No matter what happens, you stay down and you stay silent." Her voice was a razor-sharp command, brooking no argument. The look on his face was one of pure horror. He understood what she was about to do. Eva turned her back on them. She unslung her suppressed rifle and moved. She did not run towards the truck. Instead, she angled away from the prisoners, towards a pile of rubble that offered a slightly elevated firing position. She was drawing a line. She was making herself the target. The soldiers were now fully disembarked, a group of 6 or 7, milling about between the truck and the gate. It was then that one of them shouted, his voice sharp with alarm. He had found the first sentry. Chaos erupted. The soldiers scattered, bringing their weapons up, their heads swiveling, trying to find the threat in the darkness. They were trained, professional. They would fan out. They would secure the perimeter, and they would inevitably find the huddled prisoners. Ira did not give them the chance. She took a deep, calming breath. the world narrowing to the green circle of her scope. She ignored the frantic shouts, the confusion. She found her first target, a soldier who was moving to take cover behind the truck's front wheel. She focused on the center of his mass. "Phut!" the man crumpled. She shifted aim. "Phut!" A second soldier, who had been turning towards the sound, spun and fell. Shouts turned into panicked yells. They knew they were under attack, but from where? The suppression of her rifle made the shots almost impossible to locate. Muzzle flashes from a conventional weapon would have instantly given away her position. This was a ghost fight. She was a phantom, picking them off from the darkness. She fired again. Phut! A third man went down. The remaining soldiers were now firing wildly, spraying bullets into the ruins, the loud, unsuppressed reports of their rifles shattering the night. Tracers streaked overhead, ricocheting off the stone walls with angry whines. Eva pressed herself lower as chunks of concrete exploded near her head. This was no longer a stealth mission. It was a desperate last stand. She had traded silence for time. Every second they focused their fire on her shadow was a second the prisoners remained undiscovered. She fired again, her shots methodical, precise, a deadly metronome counting down the seconds until her luck or her ammunition ran out. She was one woman against a squad, a solitary barrier holding back the tide, her defiance a silent scream in the roaring night. The enemy fire was intensifying. Bullets chipped away at her position, sending sharp fragments of stone stinging against her face and hands. She was pinned down. They had zeroed in on her general location, and it was only a matter of time before a grenade or a flanking maneuver ended the fight. Eva fired her last round. The bolt of her rifle locked back, empty. She dropped the weapon and drew her pistol. It was a gesture of pure defiance, a last symbolic stand. She looked back towards the loom where the prisoners were hidden, a silent apology forming in her mind. She had tried. She had truly tried. It was then that the sound began. A low, distant thrumming that vibrated through the very air, a deep, rhythmic beat that was entirely alien to the sharp cracks of the rifle fire. The enemy soldiers heard it too. Their firing slackened, their heads tilting up towards the sky, confusion replacing their battle focus. The thrumming grew louder, deeper, transforming into a deafening mechanical roar that swallowed all other sound. It was the most beautiful noise Eva had ever heard. From over the shattered skyline, two dark shapes emerged, moving with impossible speed and purpose. AH-64. Apache attack helicopters, their sleek, predatory forms silhouetted against the night sky. They swooped in like avenging angels, their chin-mounted 30mm cannons swiveling downward. For a split second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, hell was unleashed. A torrent of fire erupted from the lead Apache. Tracers, brighter and thicker than any rifle round, streaked down into the mill yard, stitching a line of devastation directly through the enemy soldiers and their truck. The vehicle exploded in a ball of orange fire, the concussion wave slamming into Eva and shaking the ground beneath her. The enemy fire ceased instantly, replaced by the overwhelming, systematic thunder of the chain gun. The second Apache hovered, providing top cover, its sophisticated sensors scanning for any other threats. Eva slumped against the rubble, the pistol falling from her numb fingers. The sudden silence that followed the initial cannon burst was almost as shocking as the noise itself. Her ears rang, and the acrid smell of smoke and cordite filled the air. The radio on her vest, which she had ignored during the firefight, suddenly crackled to life. "Captain Rostova, this is Paladin Lead. You are a remarkably difficult woman to find." The voice was calm, professional, but with an undeniable undercurrent of relief. It was her commander, Colonel Jax. "We picked up your emergency beacon the moment you activated it. Took us a while to get a flight path cleared. You want to tell us what the hell is going on down there?" Eva fumbled for the transmit button, her whole body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. "Command, Paladin, I have 7 souls for extraction. I repeat, 7 friendly souls. We are in the main mill building. The yard is hot." "Copy that, 7 souls. Jax responded, his voice all business now. "We have you on thermal. Hold your position. A pave hawk is 5 minutes out for dust off. We'll keep the skies clear for you." She turned towards the loom. Leo, it's over! They're here! We're going home! She shouted, her voice cracking with a sob she could no longer suppress. One by one, the prisoners emerged from their hiding place, their faces pale and stunned. Illuminated by the burning wreckage of the truck, they stared in awe at the Apaches circling overhead, the powerful downdraft from their rotors whipping up dust and debris. Leo was the first to reach her. He didn't say a word. He simply stood before her, his body trembling, and snapped a perfect formal salute. His eyes, clear and steady now, held a gratitude so profound it was beyond speech. The other prisoners gathered behind him, their postures straightening, their chins lifting. They were soldiers again, not prisoners. Era returned the salute, her own hand shaking. She looked at their faces, these men she had pulled back from the abyss. The weight of the photograph in her pocket was gone, replaced by the living, breathing reality of their salvation. The court-martial, the broken regulations, the reprimand, none of it mattered. They had told her to stay out of the dark zone. They had given her a direct order. But as the distinct whine of the approaching rescue helicopter grew louder, promising a journey home, Eva Rostova knew with absolute certainty that some orders were meant to be broken.